When my fiancé declared, "I need a prenup, I won't gamble my future on you," I simply smiled and agreed. Bum, I quietly had my attorney craft, one that safeguarded every piece of my hard-earned success. The shock on his legal team, when they discovered my assets outweighed his tenfold, was a moment I'll never forget. The words fell into the air between us like a cold, brittle weight, sharp enough to cut through the romantic candlelight of our favorite Italian restaurant, Marcello's. The faint clink of silverware paused for a beat, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. I kept my hands steady on the table, my wine glass gently set down, the small stem warm against my fingers. Inside, something cracked open, raw, unshakable, but carefully hidden beneath my calm demeanor. "Okay," I said, the words so soft, it almost blended with the hum of quiet chatter around us. "That makes sense." He blinked, clearly surprised. I watched his shoulders relax slightly, his body language shifting from tense to relieved. "You're amazing, Paige. Most women would throw a fit over this. You get it. You really do." I forced a small smile. I knew exactly what he thought, what he wanted to think. That I was calm, unbothered by his need for protection. That I understood the value of keeping our assets separate. To him, I was just another woman who would quietly accept a man's need to keep his wealth guarded. Grant's words came with the same level of emotion someone might use to discuss a business lease, not love. His eyes met mine, but only just enough to see the reflection of his own satisfaction, mirrored in my expression. He didn't know that for 3 years, he'd been living a lie. Not about me, not exactly, but about the version of me he had built in his mind. I had kept my truth hidden, buried under a surface of simplicity. To Grant, I was the woman who drove a dented Honda Civic, lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment, and had just enough success to be unremarkable. He never asked about the details. Never dug too deep into what I really had. He had never even considered it. I wasn't just a consultant scraping by, like the quiet version I'd projected for him. No, sitting across from him that evening was a woman worth $5 million. It was all part of my plan, the double life I'd built meticulously over the years. While he thought I was content with my small world, I had built something that would one day be a game changer. CloudSync Pro, the cloud-based software I created 6 years ago, had exploded in the business world, generating royalties that paid my bills, and then some. I didn't drive a flashy car or wear expensive clothes, but I owned 7 properties in 3 states, a diverse portfolio worth millions, and I'd been quietly investing in the stock market since I was 18. But none of that mattered to Grant. He didn't need to know. He reached for my hand then, squeezing it lightly, as if everything was just fine. His grip was warm, comforting, and I almost let myself believe it too. "God, you're so perfect, Paige. I can't believe how lucky I am. You understand me. This is why I know you're the one." The sincerity in his voice was so palpable, so genuine in its own way. And yet, as his words floated into the space between us, I couldn't help but wonder, did he ever really see me, or was I just another piece of his life he had neatly placed into a box, a safe, predictable partner who fit into the narrative he had carefully constructed for himself? "You're amazing," he repeated. "It's just so rare to find someone like you, who really gets it." I nodded, keeping my smile just the right size. I get it, I said again, my voice steady. Protecting what you've built is smart. He smiled back at me, and I could almost feel the relief flood through him like a wave washing over a man who had just found the perfect solution to his anxiety. But there was a darker edge to his relief, something that made me feel small, invisible. As though he had just figured me out and was proud of his new understanding. What he didn't know was that by the end of the night, I was already 3 steps ahead of him. I wasn't just playing along. I wasn't just agreeing to his demands out of some passive need to please him. No. I was setting the stage. The moment I agreed to his terms, I was preparing my own counterattack. Because what Grant didn't know was that I didn't need him. I didn't need anyone. I didn't need to hide my wealth for him. But if he wanted to play the role of protector, I'd let him. I'd let him think I was the woman who needed him. The woman who couldn't survive without him. But the truth was he was about to learn who I really was. And when he did, everything would change. I grew up in a house where money was a shadow, always lurking in the corners, never fully acknowledged but always present. My parents' marriage had been built on promises of security, a shared dream of a life they could build together, until it wasn't. I still remember the night I saw them fight for the first time. I was 14, supposed to be asleep, but the sound of raised voices drifted up the stairs and kept me awake. I could hear my mother's voice crack with emotion, a sound I'd never heard from her before. My father's voice was lower, defensive, a tone he used when he was trying to justify something he knew was wrong. I crept to the top of the stairs in my pajamas, clutching my stuffed rabbit, as I peered through the banister spindles. Da 17,000, David, my mother said, the words trembling on the edge of hysteria. You spent da 17,000 without telling me. It's an investment. My father replied, his voice tight, as if it was a defense he'd rehearsed. The market was hot. I was trying to build something for us. You were trying to prove something to your brother. My mother snapped back, a note of disgust creeping into her words. The lake house. The house we could never afford, but you bought it anyway. I sat frozen, clutching my rabbit tightly, listening to them tear each other apart. The argument escalated quickly, the words growing sharper, cutting deeper. My father's investments, meant to secure their future, were nothing more than his need to prove he wasn't the lesser sibling, to show he was just as successful as his brother. But in doing so, he'd pushed my mother to the brink, and now their financial future hung by a thread. I could hear my mother sobbing, her body shaking, while my father stormed out of the house, leaving only the sound of the slamming door behind him. I stayed there, listening to the quiet, the stillness that followed the storm. 2 years of lawyers and mediators followed, all over the division of assets. Their marriage crumbled, not over love lost, but over what they thought they could buy with the money they didn't have. My college fund became leverage in a game of financial tug of war. They fought over the house, over the things that should have mattered the least, but in the end, it was all about the money. That night, I made a promise to myself. I would never let money define my relationships. I would never let it become a weapon in love. I would never let anyone love me for what I could provide, only for who I was. But life doesn't work that way, does it? The world revolves around money, and I learned that early. The only difference was that I wasn't going to let it control me. I'd make my own fortune, quietly, in the background, and I'd let people see only what I wanted them to see. I started small, a part-time job at 18 while I was still in high school. My first paycheck went into an investment account, not much, but enough to get me started. I studied compound interest like it was a secret code, something I could crack that no one else knew. I watched the numbers grow, slowly at first, then faster, as I invested more carefully, diversifying, learning how to play the game without ever letting anyone know I was playing. At 26, when I sold my first licensing deal for CloudSync Pro, I was still in a relationship with a man who suddenly became very interested in my career potential. When money entered the picture, I knew I had to act. That was the moment I made the decision to keep my success quiet. I bought a modest apartment, drove a beat-up Honda Civic, wore jeans from Target, and kept my life simple. But the truth was I had built something no one could touch. CloudSync Pro was a cloud-based inventory management system that had exploded in the business world, and it was mine. Every month, I received a $52,000 in royalties, money I didn't need to work for, money that flowed into my account while I lived like a middle-class tech consultant. I owned 7 properties spread across 3 states, and my investments were growing at a steady pace. But it wasn't about the money. Not really. It was about proving to myself that I could be someone, that I could create something that mattered. And I didn't need anyone to know. Then I met Grant. I was at Jessica's wedding, seated at the singles table with the rest of the misfits, distant cousins, friends of friends, people who didn't really belong anywhere. It was the kind of table you didn't want to sit at, but somehow we all ended up there anyway. Grant was different. There was something magnetic about him, not in an obvious way, but in the way he spoke, the way he carried himself. He had that quiet confidence, the kind that made you feel like he was someone important, even when he was just telling a story about a difficult client. There was no arrogance in him, just ambition, the kind of drive that I admired because it reminded me of my own path. He ran a boutique real estate consultancy called Harrison & Associates. I didn't know it at the time, but his business was struggling. He had clients who paid late, overhead that consumed most of his profit, but none of that was visible to anyone who looked at him. He had business cards with embossed lettering, a polished LinkedIn profile, a leased Audi Q5, and a loft in a trendy area. He had mastered the art of presenting success, even if it was all just a performance. I was drawn to him, not because I needed him or wanted what he had, but because for the first time in a long time, someone wasn't looking at me as a stepping stone or a potential resource. He saw me as I was, or so I thought. For 3 years, I played the part of the girlfriend who drove a modest car, who never mentioned my successes, who celebrated his accomplishments while downplaying my own. I kept my life vague, never letting him ask the questions that would unravel the story I had worked so hard to create. It was easy, at first. I made myself small, kept my success tucked away like a secret. But Grant didn't ask. He never dug deeper. And for a while, I was content with that. The lies were comfortable. They kept things simple. They kept things safe. But then the comments started. Little things, at first. We need to be smart with our money when we get married. My dad lost everything in his divorce. I won't make the same mistakes. At first, I thought it was just normal pre-marriage anxiety. But it didn't stop. He kept talking about prenups, about the importance of protecting what you have. Slowly, I realized that Grant wasn't just worried about his future with me. He was preparing for the possibility of us not having one. And that, I realized, was where the real game began. It started small, almost imperceptible at first. Little comments, as if he were just trying to be practical. We need to talk about the future, he'd say, his voice casual. But the anxiety in his eyes was always there, lurking beneath the surface. When we're married, we'll have to be careful with money. My dad's situation, losing everything in the divorce. At first, I brushed it off. Every couple has money worries. I didn't think much of it. But then it started to shift. The comments grew more frequent, more pointed. I've been reading about prenups. They're just smart, Keeps everything clear. I nodded, keeping my response neutral, but inside, I felt something tighten. I could tell where this was headed. It wasn't about being smart with money anymore. It was about control. I'd been ignoring it, hoping it was just a phase, hoping he was just stressed. But then one evening, as we sat at our favorite Thai place, the topic came up again. I think it's the best decision, Grant said, swirling his glass of wine, his voice a little more confident now, like he had convinced himself. A prenup is just necessary. Protects both of us, right? The words hung in the air between us, settling like a weight I couldn't shake off. I took a sip of my wine, swallowing hard. Okay, I said, my voice calm, betraying none of the unease gnawing at me. It makes sense. Good, he said, relief flooding his face. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You're amazing, Paige. Most women would be freaking out by now, but you get it. I smiled, trying to keep the bitterness at bay. What he didn't know was that I wasn't freaking out, because I already knew the game he was playing. This wasn't just about money. It was about control, about making sure I never outshone him. And that's when I realized something that made the pit in my stomach grow colder. Grant had never seen me. He saw the version of me I had allowed him to see, the modest woman with the modest job, driving the modest car, living the modest life. What he didn't know was that I was far from modest. I had been hiding my success for years, and now, it seemed, it was all about to unravel. I tried not to let the anger show on my face. I was playing my part, doing what I had done for the last 3 years. I had kept everything hidden from him. The royalties from CloudSync Pro, the properties, the investments. I let him think I was just another woman who didn't need to be protected because I had nothing to protect. But now, with every word that came from his mouth, I realized he was preparing to box me in. A prenup wasn't just about protecting his assets. It was about keeping me in my place, ensuring that my success would never be a threat to his carefully constructed narrative. The worst part was, I couldn't even be angry at him, not yet. He hadn't done anything wrong in his mind. He had never questioned the version of me he'd built. I had given him that version. And now, I had to decide whether to keep playing the role or whether to finally reveal the truth. But revealing the truth wasn't as simple as telling him I was worth $5 million. It was more than that, It was about everything I had built for myself. Everything I had kept hidden to prove to myself that I didn't need anyone's approval, not even his. Grant's increasing obsession with securing his future meant he was more focused on what he could control than what we were building together. And that was where the disconnect happened. Every time he mentioned the prenup, it became clearer that he didn't see us as partners, He saw me as an accessory, something to complement his life, not someone who could stand beside him as an equal. Do you think we need to worry about our future like this? I asked, trying to keep my tone light, trying to keep the conversation from taking a turn I wasn't ready for. Grant looked at me, his brow furrowing slightly. I'm just being practical, he said, his voice more serious now. I don't want to make the same mistakes my dad made. He thought everything was fine, but one bad decision and it all fell apart. I nodded, understanding the root of his fear, but it was clear we were coming at this from two very different places. To him, money was a shield. To me, it was a tool, something that gave me independence and freedom. But neither of us had considered what would happen when the lines between our individual definitions of success started to blur. The more he spoke, the more I felt like I was listening to a man trying to convince himself that his future with me was secure. I wasn't a threat. I was a partner, just like anyone else. But I was more than that. I was a woman who had worked her ass off to get where she was, and I wasn't going to let anyone, least of all him, make me feel small again. I realized then that the game had already begun. He thought the prenup was a way to protect himself from a future that might threaten him. But in truth, it was me who needed protection, not from him, but from the version of myself I had allowed him to see. The game wasn't about securing his future. It was about securing my own. And if I had to play dirty to win, then so be it. Okay, I said, my voice steady. I'll agree to a prenup. Grant's face lit up, relief evident in the way his shoulders finally relaxed. He was certain that I had given in, that everything would be fine now. But what he didn't realize was that I hadn't agreed to his terms. I had just set the stage for mine. The next few months felt like I was living in two worlds at once. On the outside, everything appeared normal, comfortable, even. Grant and I continued with our lives as usual, planning the wedding, attending brunches with his mother, and talking about the future like any couple would. He was still the charming, successful businessman in his mind, and I was the supportive, modest girlfriend who knew her place. It worked, at least on the surface. But inside, I was preparing for something that Grant had no idea was coming. I kept pretending to be the woman he thought he knew. I wore my usual outfits, nothing too flashy, always simple, practical. I drove my Honda Civic, never brought up my wealth, and always kept our dates low, key, the kind of places he would deem modestly nice. Everything I did, everything I said, was calculated to keep up the illusion that I wasn't a threat to him. And it wasn't just him. It was everyone. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I had been living my whole life this way, hiding who I truly was. Never letting anyone see the full picture. The quiet wealth I had built was like a shadow in my life, always lurking just beneath the surface, waiting to be discovered. But it wasn't just the money that I was hiding, it was the truth about who I was. Grant, of course, had no clue. He was too wrapped up in his own image to even think about digging deeper. He never asked about my finances. Never questioned why I always suggested cheaper restaurants. Why I never seemed to care about status or appearances. He just assumed I was like everyone else, comfortable, predictable, safe. I was the girl who wouldn't rock the boat, who wouldn't challenge his narrative of being the provider. The one who was always in control. But I knew that sooner or later, that facade would crack. It was only a matter of time before the truth came to light. And when it did, it would shatter everything we had built. It started with his comments about money. At first, they were subtle, just casual observations about our future. Like the time he mentioned how his father had lost everything in his divorce, and how he didn't want to make the same mistakes. But then it escalated. "We need to be smart about money when we get married," he said one evening over dinner, his voice just a little too serious. "I can't afford to make the same mistakes my dad did. We'll need to plan everything out, make sure we have things in place to protect us." I nodded, the smile on my face so tight it almost hurt. "Of course," I said, trying to sound supportive. "It's always good to be prepared." But something in his tone made me uneasy. There was an underlying current of fear, of insecurity. As if he was already planning for a future where things didn't go according to plan. I tried to brush it off, but it kept coming up. Slowly, his concerns shifted from being about general financial security to being about the prenup. Every conversation we had seemed to circle back to it, like it was a matter of life or death for him. "I've been reading a lot about prenuptial agreements lately," he said one night, his eyes gleaming with a mix of nervousness and certainty. "It's just smart, you know. Protects both parties. Makes sure everything is clear, no misunderstandings later." At that moment, I knew he was getting serious about it. And that's when I realized something I hadn't been willing to admit before. Grant wasn't just worried about his own future. He was worried about me. Specifically, he was worried about me having more than he did. It wasn't about love. It was about control, about power. And he had no idea that the person he was trying to control wasn't the one sitting across from him at that table. The real me, the one who had built a life outside of his narrow view of success, was still hidden. I kept playing along, letting him think he was in control. But as the weeks went by, I could see it more clearly. This wasn't just about securing his assets. It was about making sure that I never outshined him, that I never became a threat to his carefully constructed self-image. I kept wondering how long I could keep up the act. How long I could keep pretending to be the woman Grant thought he knew, while planning my own strategy in the background. And yet, even as I played the role, part of me was starting to break. Not from anger, but from the realization that the more I hid, the more I lost myself. I was tired of being the woman who only existed in the shadow of someone else's expectations. I was tired of letting my success be something I buried deep inside, just to make someone else feel better about themselves. The cracks in my perfect life were starting to show. It wasn't just the prenup, It was everything. Every day, I grew more and more aware that the life I had built in secret, the life I had kept hidden from everyone, was the one I was most afraid of losing. But I had already made my choice. I wasn't going to shrink anymore. I wasn't going to let anyone make me small, not for them, not for anyone. If Grant wanted to see the real me, if he wanted to play this game, then I would make sure he got to see exactly who I was, every last detail. The pieces were falling into place, and I could feel the moment of truth approaching, just beyond the horizon. 3 days. That's all it took for everything to change. After the conversation about the prenup, things felt different between Grant and me. He didn't know it, but the moment I agreed to his terms was the moment I took control. I wasn't playing by his rules anymore. I was playing by mine. Grant had gone back to his confident, polished self after that dinner. The tension eased from his shoulders, and he seemed to think everything was set in stone. He'd never suspect that, while he was planning his future, I was planning mine. I couldn't help but admire his confidence. The way he seemed so sure of himself, as if this prenup was just a business deal, no emotions involved, no hard feelings. Just a simple, logical decision to protect what he had worked for. But I knew better. He had no idea that I was the one protecting myself now. The next morning, I called Eleanor. We'd worked together for years, and she knew more about my business than anyone else, except for me. She'd been with me through the CloudSync Pro launch, through the legal headaches, the contracts, the deals. She was sharp, ruthless when she needed to be, and as loyal as anyone could ask for. But more than that, she understood the stakes. "I need you to draft a counter-proposal," I said, my voice low but firm. Eleanor didn't need any more explanation. She knew exactly what I meant. By the time we hung up, I felt something shift inside me, like the first gust of wind before a storm. I wasn't going to sit back and let Grant think he had me cornered. I was done being the woman he thought he knew. I didn't want to keep lying to him. I wanted him to know who I really was. All of me. Not just the parts he had fit into his neat little box. Eleanor worked fast. I hadn't expected anything less. 3 days later, I had the document in my inbox. My heart raced as I opened it. The weight of what it represented pressing on my chest. I knew I was about to do something that would change everything. But I couldn't stop now. The path was set. The document was simple at first, clean, standard. But buried within it was one clause that would turn Grant's world upside down. It wasn't what was written on the surface. It was what wasn't. Full financial disclosure, from both parties. I had it all in there, every property, every royalty, every investment. The truth of my wealth documented and ready to be laid bare. I could feel the weight of it, like the world was holding its breath, waiting for the moment when everything would change. The next step was crucial timing. I didn't want to give Grant the chance to backtrack, to reconsider, to pull away from what he thought was just a formality. No. I needed to hit him with it when he was least prepared. The prenup signing was set for Tuesday at 2:00 p.m. The hours leading up to it felt surreal. I couldn't help but replay every conversation Grant and I had ever had, every glance, every word. I kept wondering how I had missed the signs for so long. How had I let him believe that I was just like everyone else. Just another woman who needed protecting. Just another person who couldn't hold her own. But I wasn't just holding my own. I was standing tall, building something he couldn't even begin to understand. When the time came, I didn't feel the rush of triumph I had expected. I didn't feel the thrill of victory. What I felt was something else. Something quieter. It was as though I had already known how this story would end. How I was going to end it. Grant, meanwhile, was still the picture of calm. He greeted me with a smile at the law office, all business as usual. He looked good, clean, shaven. Wearing that charcoal suit I had grown accustomed to seeing him in. He kissed me on the cheek, but there was something missing. No warmth, no tenderness, just a quick peck, like we were already in a transaction, not a relationship. I couldn't help but notice how different he seemed. How the man I'd fallen for, the man who made me feel seen, the man who loved me for all the right reasons, was now a stranger, a man who couldn't see past his own ego long enough to realize he had no idea who I really was. We sat down in the conference room, and I immediately felt the weight of the space between us. There was a silence, thick with unspoken words, as if both of us were waiting for something. For me to back down. For him to do the right thing. Richard Brennan, Grant's lawyer, entered shortly after, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. He smiled politely, shaking my hand with a firm grip. "Miss Calloway," he said smoothly, his voice practiced. "Grant's told me wonderful things about you. This should be very straightforward." Straightforward. I could almost taste the irony in the word. What was straightforward about this? What was straightforward about the man sitting across from me, who had spent the last 3 years building a lie? Grant handed me the prenup, the one he had prepared. "It's all set, Paige, everything we talked about. We can go over the details together." I didn't touch the document at first. I just looked at it, my hands resting flat on the table. The papers in front of me were a contract, but they were also something more. They were the culmination of everything I had been hiding. The things I had kept from him, because I didn't want to scare him away. I didn't want to seem like a threat. I didn't want him to feel like he wasn't enough. But that was the moment I realized how wrong I had been, because all this time, he had never truly seen me. He had only seen what he thought I could offer him. I could feel the shift in the room as Eleanor entered. A slight, but deliberate click of her heels that was just loud enough to command attention. Her presence was immediate, and in that moment, I knew this wasn't just about a prenup. It was about taking control back. "Let's begin," Eleanor said, her tone calm but lethal in its precision. She didn't even glance at Grant's prenup. Instead, she opened her portfolio, and in that moment, I knew everything was about to change. She slid the counter-proposal across the table, thick and carefully crafted. Richard picked it up, scanning it briefly, and then his eyes flicked to me with the kind of surprise I had been waiting for. He looked at the clause, the one that demanded full financial disclosure from both parties. Grant's eyes narrowed, and for the first time, I saw the faintest flicker of unease. "Miss Calloway," Richard began, voice tight. "This clause. This is not standard." "No," Eleanor replied, her voice smooth but firm. "It's not standard. It's necessary." I glanced at Grant, who was still holding the document in his hands. His face had gone pale, the color draining as he processed the implications of what was in front of him. I met his eyes. "This is what you asked for, Grant, I said softly. "Full transparency. Now we both know exactly what we're dealing with." The silence that followed felt like it lasted an eternity. But, in that moment, I realized that everything had changed. The truth was no longer hidden. There was no more pretending, and neither of us could go back. The room felt colder suddenly, like the temperature had dropped several degrees. But it was only the tension thickening the air. The silence stretched between us, pregnant with the kind of anticipation I had only ever read about in novels, where the truth, when finally exposed, would tear everything apart. Grant's fingers tightened around the document, his knuckles white against the legal paper. His face was a mask of disbelief, his eyes darting from the document to me, and back again, trying to piece together what was happening. He looked like he had just stepped into the middle of a storm, and the winds were picking up speed. Eleanor didn't break the silence. She remained cool, unflinching, while I watched the waves of realization hit Grant. The man who had been so sure of himself, the one who had planned for every eventuality, was now completely blindsided by the one thing he never expected. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. The truth was right in front of him, laid bare in the most excruciating way possible. The documents Eleanor had crafted with such surgical precision were like a map of my life, a life Grant knew nothing about, a life I had kept from him for years. "Miss Calloway," Richard Brennan's voice broke the silence, tight with professional discomfort. "This is highly unusual. You're asking for full disclosure, not just for the business interests, but for every asset, I could see Grant's jaw working as he tried to suppress whatever panic was rising in him. He was struggling to maintain control, but the fast ad was cracking. "Wait," he said, his voice strained. This is a joke, right?" "No joke, Eleanor replied flatly, her eyes fixed on him. "You wanted full transparency. This is what full transparency looks like." I couldn't help it. I had to ask. "Grant, did you honestly think I wouldn't protect myself? That I wouldn't safeguard the things I've worked for?" He froze, his eyes wide with shock, as if he hadn't ever truly considered what my success meant, what it could mean in the face of his own carefully crafted image. His fingers trembled as he flipped through the pages of my financial disclosure, each number hitting him harder than the last. His voice broke on the next words, disbelief and anger mixing in a harsh cocktail. "You've been lying to me. For 3 years," he whispered, his breath came faster, shallow. "All this time, you let me think." He couldn't finish. "No," I said, cutting him off, my voice level. "I never lied. You just never asked the right questions." His face twisted, disbelief turning to frustration. He slammed the document down on the table, the sound loud in the quiet room. "You let me think I was the provider. I let you into my life, my business, my family, and this is what I get in return." I didn't flinch. I couldn't. I had been waiting for this moment, preparing for it in ways that were both exhilarating and terrifying. "This isn't about what you think you deserve, Grant. This is about the truth." I leaned in slightly, watching his face as the words landed. the truth that you never bothered to ask about. Because you were too busy with your own performance. Grant's chest heaved, his hands shaking, and for the first time since we'd met, I saw him as he truly was, vulnerable, unguarded, desperate to hold on to the image he had created for himself. It wasn't about me anymore. It wasn't about our relationship. It was about his pride, about the story he had told the world and himself. "This can't be real," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. His eyes were wild, darting to Alina, to me, to the papers scattered across the table. "It's real," I replied, calm as a stone, watching him try to process the information he had been completely blind to. "Verified and documented. Every number, every asset, it's all there. You wanted transparency, Grant. Now you've got it." His face was drained of color, his mouth moving soundlessly as he scanned through the figures, the properties, the royalties. Everything I had built in silence. Everything he had assumed I didn't have. And the truth of it, the weight of it, settled on him like a 1,000-pound anchor, dragging him under. "You," he stammered, his voice cracking. "You've been lying to me all this time. And I thought." He trailed off, the words dissolving into the heavy air around us. "I thought you were just like me. That was it, wasn't it? All these years, he thought I was just like him. Ordinary, predictable, safe. But I wasn't. I had never been." And now that truth was out, sitting between us like a chasm too wide to bridge. Eleanor cleared her throat, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "We can discuss next steps later, Grant. But right now, I think we need to address the larger issue here." She looked directly at him, her tone sharp. "The prenup. The terms in that agreement are no longer applicable. We're requesting a new document that protects both parties equally, and we're starting with full disclosure." Grant's breath hitched as his gaze flickered back to me. It was as though he was seeing me for the first time, seeing the woman who had been standing in front of him all along, just waiting for the moment to make herself known. The woman who had been underestimated, ignored, and now, finally, exposed. The room felt smaller, as though the walls were closing in on us. And for the first time in 3 years, I wasn't afraid. I was done hiding. Done being someone else's version of who I was. Grant still couldn't believe it. His face, the way his eyes darted between the papers and me, the disbelief that twisted his expression. It was almost pitiful. But it was also necessary. This was the moment he had to see the truth. This was the moment he had to understand exactly who he had been dealing with all this time. But there was no going back from this. The woman he thought he knew, the one who had fit into his life as his passive, uncomplicated partner, was gone. And the truth, the one he had never bothered to uncover, had just shattered everything he thought he understood. "I don't know who you are anymore," he said, his voice low, the hurt in it raw and unrestrained. And for the first time, I realized something that had been there all along. "I'm exactly who I've always been," I said, my voice steady and unwavering. "You just never bothered to look." His jaw clenched, but he didn't respond. He didn't have to. The truth had already spoken for itself. Grant didn't speak for a long time. His eyes kept flicking between the papers, the numbers, and me. Like he was trying to piece together something that didn't make sense. But there was no more sense to be made. The illusion he'd built around us, around me, had just crumbled into dust, and he was left standing in the wreckage. I sat there, watching him, feeling the shift in the room, the atmosphere thick with the weight of everything that had been exposed. The silence stretched longer than I expected, thick with confusion, anger, and something else I couldn't place. Was it betrayal? Or was it humiliation? It didn't matter. Whatever it was his to bear, not mine. His hands, which had been so steady just moments ago, now shook slightly as he fumbled with the documents, his movements jerky and unfocused. He pushed the papers aside, shoving them across the table like they were foreign objects that no longer mattered. Paige. His voice broke for the first time. Why didn't you tell me, all this time? I didn't answer immediately. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to say. How could I explain to him the way I'd felt? The years of carefully curated silence, the need to hide who I truly was in order to survive in a relationship built on assumptions, How could I explain that I had hidden my success not to deceive him, but to protect myself from becoming someone he only loved for what I could provide? Why didn't you trust me? His voice was quieter now, softer, but the hurt was still there, raw and cutting. He reached across the table, his hand trembling, but I didn't flinch. Not anymore. I was done shrinking. I didn't lie to you, Grant. I just never gave you a reason to ask the right questions, I said, my voice cold but steady, even as my chest tightened with a strange, hollow feeling. I didn't think you cared to know. His expression faltered. The mask of control he'd worn for so long was slipping, and now I could see it, his true self, the one he'd kept hidden behind his arrogance. His business deals, his manufactured success. The facade that he thought was unshakable was gone, and all that was left was a man too afraid to face the reality of the woman sitting across from him. You let me believe I was the provider, he muttered, almost to himself. I thought we were building something together. But now. He stopped, his throat working, but no more words came out. I leaned back in my chair, letting the weight of the silence settle between us. I could see the wheels turning in his mind. The realization of everything I had built without him. Everything he had never known. And it hurt him. More than he was willing to admit. But it wasn't the hurt I had anticipated. The kind of hurt where you could fix things, apologize, and move forward. No, this was something different. This was pride cracking under the pressure of a truth it could no longer hide. You're angry, I said, breaking the silence. My voice was calm, but my insides were anything but. But you don't have the right to be. Not anymore. I watched as the frustration flashed across his face. Then the realization slowly dawned on him. It wasn't just anger, not just about money or control, It was about how everything he thought he knew about me had been a lie, at least, in his eyes. No, he said, shaking his head, his jaw tightening as though trying to choke back the emotions that threatened to spill over. I'm not angry, hurt. Because you kept all this from me. You made me feel like I wasn't enough. Like everything I was doing. It wasn't good enough for you. I felt the sting of his words, but I didn't let it show. He wasn't wrong. I had hidden myself from him. But I hadn't done it out of malice. I had done it to survive. To prove to myself that I could build something on my own, without relying on anyone. without needing anyone to validate my worth. You weren't enough, Grant, I said softly, but with finality. Not because of who you are, but because of the version of me you needed me to be. I wasn't the woman you wanted me to be. I wasn't your safe, predictable partner. I was something more, and you couldn't handle that. The words hung in the air between us, heavy and undeniable. He opened his mouth to argue, but then closed it again. He didn't have an answer. Not this time. For the first time in our entire relationship, I saw him for what he truly was. Someone who had never truly seen me. Only what I could offer him. The woman who could make him feel secure, make him feel like the successful one, the one who wouldn't threaten his ego. I'm sorry, he said quietly, the words sounding foreign on his lips. I thought we were building something real. I stared at him, searching his face for some trace of the man I had loved. But I couldn't find him anymore. There was nothing left but a stranger, someone who had never really seen me at all. Maybe we were, I said, the words tasting bitter. But now, I see who you really are. And I can't unsee it. His face crumpled, the mask of the successful. Control man finally breaking, but it was too late. The pieces had already fallen, and nothing could put them back together. Eleanor didn't say anything, but I knew she was watching me closely, waiting for me to make the next move. She was the only one who understood what this meant for me, how this wasn't just about the prenup. This was about my entire life, about me finally breaking free from the illusion I had been trapped in. Grant stood up suddenly, the chair scraping loudly across the floor. His movements were sharp, jerky, like he was trying to regain control of a situation that had slipped through his fingers. I need some air, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I can't do this. I watched him leave, his figure disappearing into the hallway. I didn't chase him. I didn't beg him to stay. There was nothing left to say. He had made his choice long ago, and I had finally made mine. The door slammed behind him, the sound echoing through the room like the finality of a chapter closing. It was over, and I was free. The days that followed were a blur of numbness and silence. I kept myself busy, too busy to think, too busy to feel. I threw myself into work. CloudSync Pro was expanding, and I had contracts to finalize, updates to code, meetings to attend. My mind was constantly occupied, but it was only a distraction. The truth was, nothing could fill the void Grant's absence had left. The phone was silent for a while. No texts. No calls. I expected it, but part of me, the part that had loved him, the part that had held on to the hope that maybe, just maybe, things could be different, still checked my phone every few minutes, waiting for something. Anything. But nothing came. The silence in my apartment was suffocating. I walked through the rooms, feeling like a stranger in my own life, the life that had been built on lies, on projections, on masks. I thought I had known who I was. But now, after everything, I wasn't sure anymore. I wasn't sure what was real or what I had been pretending to be. Then, one night, Maya showed up unannounced. She knocked on my door at 7, the sound loud and insistent, just like her. When I opened it, she stood there, her hands on her hips, wearing that look she always wore when she was about to drag me out of whatever hole I was hiding in. I'm taking you out, she said, pushing past me before I could protest. You're going to get dressed. And we're going to have some fun. I didn't have the energy to argue. Instead, I let her take control, let her pull me into the evening. Maya was relentless, always pushing, always pulling me from the dark spaces I liked to hide in. But that night, I was too tired to resist. We went to a small restaurant downtown. The kind where the food was simple, the lights dim, and the conversations weren't heavy with expectations. As we sat down, Maya ordered a bottle of wine, her usual attempt at getting me to loosen up. But I didn't feel like loosening up. I felt like I was walking through a fog, trying to make sense of everything that had happened, everything that had been lost. You did the right thing, Maya said after a while, her voice soft but firm. I know it doesn't feel like it, but you did. You're free now, Paige. Free from him, free from all the lies. I stared at my wine glass, swirling the liquid absently. I don't feel free, I murmured. I feel empty. She didn't say anything at first. She just watched me, as if trying to find the words that would break through the numbness I had wrapped around myself. You're grieving, she said finally. And that's okay. It's okay to be sad. But don't let him take any more of you. Don't let him make you think you were wrong for protecting yourself. I nodded, though I wasn't sure I believed it. The truth was, I had been protecting myself for so long that it felt like second nature. But the walls I had built to keep others out had also kept me from feeling anything real. The only thing that had been real for me, in the last few years, was the image of who I thought Grant was, and who I thought I was in relation to him. The wine glass was empty before I realized it. Maya ordered another bottle. And we fell into a comfortable silence, the kind that only sisters could share, without words, without explanation. It wasn't until a week later that Grant reached out. His message was short, almost curt. We need to talk. My place. Tomorrow at 7. My stomach twisted. A part of me wanted to ignore it, to leave it unanswered, to let him disappear from my life completely. But another part of me, the part that had loved him, the part that had waited for him to see me, needed to know what he would say. So I agreed. I showed up on time, standing outside his building. The same industrial loft I had once admired, now a place that felt foreign to me. I took a deep breath and walked in, steeling myself for whatever came next. Grant opened the door quickly, almost as if he had been waiting for me, though he looked different, disheveled, tired, like the weight of the last few days had finally caught up to him. His hair was messy, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar. For the first time, he looked like the man who had fallen apart when the truth came to light. "Thanks for coming," he said, his voice lacking the warmth it used to have, replaced now with something more cautious, something more guarded. We didn't hug. We didn't kiss. We barely even made eye contact. Instead, he led me to the living room. And we sat across from each other on the couch, the distance between us palpable. "I've been thinking about everything," Grant said, his voice quiet, "about what happened, and I know I made mistakes. I should have asked you sooner. I should have trusted you more." I stayed silent, waiting for him to continue, knowing full well where this was going. He wasn't done. "I'm sorry, Paige," he said, his voice soft but genuine. "For everything. For the prenup. For all of it. I know now that I was wrong. I didn't understand what you were doing, what you had to do to protect yourself. I thought I could handle it, that I was in control. But I wasn't. I wasn't the one who had control. You were. His words hung in the air, and for a moment, I almost believed them. Almost. But something inside me pulled me back. It wasn't just about the apology. It wasn't just about him admitting his mistakes. It was about the fact that the man sitting in front of me was not the one I had fallen in love with. He was someone I had outgrown, someone who had never seen me for who I really was, someone whose ego was too fragile to ever truly understand me. I appreciate the apology, I said, my voice steady, but it doesn't change what happened. It doesn't change who you are. Who we are. Grant flinched, as if my words stung him in a way I hadn't expected. But I wasn't sorry, This wasn't about fixing something that couldn't be fixed, It wasn't about rekindling something that had never been built on the right foundation. You were never ready to love me for who I am. Grant, I continued. You only loved the version of me you created in your head. The one that fit into your world. And I can't live like that anymore. His face twisted with confusion, pain, and something else I couldn't quite name. I don't understand, he said softly. I thought we were building something real. I stood up, looking down at him, seeing the man I had once loved, the man who had thought he could control everything, including me. You can't build anything real with someone who isn't honest with you, Grant, I said quietly. And we never were. I walked out of his apartment and into the night, the weight of 3 years of pretending finally lifting from my shoulders. I didn't look back. Not once. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe.